Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday Saddleback webinar this week. I'm Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. If you are here today and you were able to switch up your routine and join us on a Wednesday, we thank you very much. And if you're just catching this on the recording a little bit later, welcome to you too. We are glad that you could join us. As usual, as you are logging in today, please locate your control bar at the bottom of your web browser window. That's where you'll find the chat, the Q&A, and the live transcript icons. We are going to be inviting you to chat with us today. So please ensure that you select everyone from the chat drop-down menu before you go ahead and enter your comment so that everyone in attendance can participate and see what you have to say. If you have questions as we go throughout our material today, you can put those in the Q&A and we'll sort of get to those as we can. You can also put them in the chat, but they can be a little bit harder to find in the chat. So Q&A would be perfect. And if you would like to take advantage of subtitles, you can go ahead and select live transcript and then click on show subtitle. All right, we are on Twitter. We'll get started in just a minute here. But Twitter is very important for this webinar because we have a giveaway. Our presenter, Patty Vitale-Riley, has a new book coming out. It's a brand new book, officially not even out until next week, I think. But we're going to have one lucky winner today. And we're going to ask that you tweet your favorite takeaway from today's webinar, and you can make sure that you mention Patty and Saddleback, and you'll also be able to email Patty your takeaway as well, and then she'll select a winner in a few days. We'll provide that information as we go throughout the webinar and at the end of the webinar today as well. So good luck, and hopefully you enjoy this session, and one of you will go home with a brand new book. So with that being said, let's say hello to Patty. Welcome, first-time presenter on the Saddleback platform. Nice to have you.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
This is exciting. We are always excited to have a new presenter, and Patty was recommended by Emily Francis, who we love, and she's been on our platform multiple times. So we're eager to hear what you have to say today. If you could go to the chat and select everyone from the dropdown and just let us know where you're joining us from, that it would be great. I always love to see where everybody is. And that way your chat will automatically be set to that little everyone component. So that way, moving forward, when we chat, everything will be as it should. So, all right. So Patty's book that's coming out is called Teacher's Guide to Writing Workshop Mini Lessons. And it's from Heinemann. It's the Classroom Essentials series. So if you are a writing teacher and you use Workshop, this is the resource for you. We definitely want you to get a chance to take home this book. So make sure that you are tweeting throughout the session today. Let's multitask. Let's listen, let's tweet, let's chat, let's do it all. Well, do what you can. I mean, I know it's hard. It's the middle of the day, but we appreciate your participation is what I'm trying to say. Welcome, Rachel, Ashley, Robin, Robert, welcome to all of you. And it looks like, oh, it is definitely time to start. So let me go ahead and officially launch the session. We are looking to maximize our teaching for responsive, effective mini lessons, especially with an angle toward multilingual learners. So Patty is here to discuss this. And I believe these ideas come from the book, but let me give you a brief intro to Patty. She's going to tell you about herself as well. She has more than 25 years in education, and her roles have varied. So from teacher, staff developer, author, founder and director of a major literacy consulting group, and her current role as an independent consultant, author, and speaker. And in her current role, she guides schools and districts to set and realize goals, the goals that matter most in their learning communities. So welcome. We are thrilled to have you. I'm going to let you take it from here, and I will be monitoring the chat and, looking for questions and things like that, and sort of chiming in as needed.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Liz, and thank you to everyone at Saddleback. As I said, I'm super excited to be here with all of you. And I think we're going to do some learning and have some fun today. So let me just start off by sharing with you a little bit more about me and my information. So you can reach me, first of all, on Twitter. If you are an educator on Twitter, please follow me. I will follow you back. I absolutely love to engage with teachers on Twitter. I think it is such an amazing learning platform. Liz shared that my name was given to her by a teacher in North Carolina, a teacher of multilingual learners in North Carolina. Her name is Emily Francis. Emily and I are really great professional colleagues, but we have never met in person. And that's because of the beauty of social media and Twitter. So you can reach me on Twitter. You can go to my website. Now that this book and a previous book that came out not too long ago, because the pandemic sort of upended the world, have come out, I will definitely be blogging more. And of course, you are welcome to email me at any time. So all of that information is here on your screen. It will also be put in the chat. And just to let you know also that all of my slides from today and a couple of handouts that are hyperlinked to the bottom of the slides will be shared both later on today in the chat box for those of you who are with us. But then, of course, the folks at Saddleback will send you the webinar and the recording and the handouts, so you'll have that after the fact as well. So as Liz was just sharing, this is actually my 31st year in education, and I come to teaching with a variety of teaching experiences. Because I went from being a classroom teacher, I taught in both New York and New Jersey, and my last teaching experience in Northern New Jersey had a significant number of students who were multilingual learners. My first master's is in multicultural education, which is just really just showing my age, which is what the degree was called once upon a time. And after I was a classroom teacher, the first way in which I was consulting was I worked in New York City for the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project, and I spent 5 years working in New York City schools. So that was the most amazing experience I had, because I really got to experience teaching and learning and schools and teachers and students who come to teaching and learning from across the globe. And so today we are going to think about teaching mini lessons to our students. And I bring to you my experiences, my collective teaching experiences. And I'm so excited to interact with you on the chat or the Q&A and to hear about yours as well. So I want to start off by just asking you to, first of all, recognize the fact that the most important consideration in our teaching is our students. I am a firm believer in teaching students to a standard. I am a firm believer in teaching students with shared materials and experiences in a systematic way. But I am most interested in the idea that we don't just teach lessons or standards, we really teach students. And my ethos, if you will, my greatest belief is that every child has the right and the capacity to learn. So I'd love to say happy Teacher Appreciation Week. And if this is relevant to you, happy 4th, may the 4th be with you. But let's honor ourselves and our students and our appreciation during this Teacher Appreciation Week. Go ahead and chat in the chat box. What are you most hoping to get out of our time together today? If someone wants to put that, or if people want to put that in the chat box. We are going to be talking about, okay, great hope, Dolores, how to best coach and model for your team of teachers. I love that. Robert, widen your repertoire for writing. Excellent, really hope for today. That's really our focus. Hey, Anna from Atlantic City Public Schools. I'm living in Northern New Jersey, but not too far away, just up that parkway that everybody talks about. Robin, excellent. This really is a webinar that's all about mini lessons that have our multilingual students, our Ls, in the forefront. The book that Liz was referencing earlier is a book all about how to do mini lessons in general, following the architecture and being effective. But one thing that I am so incredibly passionate about is literacy instruction in general, but also inclusive practices. So one of the things that I did, and I just really love the format of this book, it's from a series called the Classroom Essentials series. And the gist is basically that just like this Saddleback webinar, and what Saddleback does in response to today's teacher and needing like immediate actionable information. This book is part of a series that is meant to be for today's teacher, someone who can't necessarily read a 600-page professional book, although that's lofty and wonderful, and if you're doing that, kudos, but that today's teacher needs information kind of quickly. So there's a lot of images and visuals and videos that go with the book. And one feature is this inclusive practices to support every writer, that I wanted to make sure that as I was talking about the universality of bringing effective mini lessons to our students, and I do think that there are a lot of teaching moves and a lot of tenets, if you will, of the architecture of a mini lesson that really is inclusive and does bring teaching to all. I also do know that we do need inclusive practices for students for whom the language in which the mini lesson is given is not their first language, students for whom processing is a challenge or a disability, students for whom, they are disengaged just, because of a variety of reasons, including, mental health or trauma or life experience, that it is really my passion to think about what inclusive practices can look like. So I love what you're saying on the chat. Yeah, that quick 5-minute mini lesson. We're definitely going to talk a lot about timing, how to be mini. Yes, Robert, I am going to talk about chunk and chew and the way the architecture does that. So thank you. Anna, absolutely, really imagining how can we be really effective with our students, and to really think about what are the specific moves that we can utilize that will make us most effective. So great plans for today. They really dovetail with the agenda. And so we're going to dig in. So let me just go back for a minute, close that down. Okay, so the first thing that is essential to consider, and again, this is really a universal concept. It's not necessarily, oh, this is an inclusive practice, or this is how you teach mini lessons for L's. If you want to teach mini lessons in a way that is effective, that is engaging, and that is inclusive, you understand that mini lesson, when we use the term mini lesson, the operative part of that word is not lesson, it's mini. Okay, so yes, we're teachers, we teach lessons, but we want to teach mini lessons. And in order to do that, the first thing that you really need to do is you need to understand that there is a 4-part architecture. Once you know this architecture, and once it becomes your mental model, planning your lessons, envisioning your scaffolds for comprehensible input, varying what you're teaching, being responsive to what your students need, all of that will come to you much more easily and with greater ease and depth once you kind of get down the architecture. So let's talk a bit about the architecture itself. And then, of course, what we're going to do is think about the architecture and specific things that you can do in order to promote inclusive practices. So the first part of the architecture, and I know that we're coming from a variety of experiences, from a variety of grade levels, and from a variety of disciplines even. What I want you to understand is that this architecture works regardless. We're talking and we're really specifying today the teaching of writing, but this architecture is an architecture that I use regardless. So I used it to teach reading. When I was in the classroom and I was still teaching other disciplines, I used it to teach math, content areas, certainly writing in the content areas, foreign language. When I coached kids, I kind of coached in this way. I really do believe in this architecture. And so the first step is called the connection. And these words are very literal, which is a good thing. So the connection is somewhere about 1 to 2 minutes. And I'll talk to you about how there are different kinds of connections, and some are shorter and some are longer. And that's certainly a consideration you want to bring to your English language learners. So the purpose of a connection is to engage, to connect, and to activate prior knowledge. Now, when we do that, we want to make sure that we're doing it quickly. Okay, so one way to do that, and one way to really make this architecture not just go well for you, the teacher, but to go really well for your students, is to utilize consistent language throughout the parts. So I might start off by saying, we have been, or have you ever, And then I end, and this is really the most important part of it all, I end by announcing the teaching point. And I utilize 99% of the time this phrase: today, I am going to teach you. Now, the key isn't necessarily that phrase. The key is that whatever language you land on to announce what you're about to teach is the language you use every day. Today, I'm going to teach you. Now I'm going to show you. We are about to learn. Again, land on the phrase that feels comfortable and natural to you, but we really want for the language to be consistent. Then, of course, we move into teaching. The teaching part of it is predicated on the belief that students learn most when you demonstrate as the first element of that. So you want to demonstrate and model as much as you can. One thing I am going to just kind of throw out today as an idea is that there are really 4 different ways that you can teach in a writing mini lesson. And one is not better than the other, but you do want to consider your audience, your students, their language proficiency, their writing capacities and experiences, and that you choose the method of demonstration that you think is going to best match their needs. Again, in a minute, I'll show you exactly what I mean when I say that. Once again, we want consistent language. Can I show you how I? Let me show you how I is how I start the teach. And then I end with, did you see how I? So one way to really get comprehensible input is to provide students with language that is going to become the anchor to their learning. They're going to learn these phrases as you use them over and over. And as you use them over and over and as they experience them, they will have really a deep context for the students. Again, the magic isn't the phrases that I've adopted. The magic is you land on a phrase that's natural, responsive, and engaging for your students, and you use it every single day. The teaching part of the mini lesson is somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes. Teaching doesn't exist without a try. And so there's kind of this adage that I remember a literacy coach said to me very, very early on in my teaching career. And she said, Patty, just because you taught it doesn't mean they got it. And I was like, oh gosh, that's one of those hard teaching lessons we had to learn early on. So part of the architecture is this opportunity for guided practice that we want for students to quickly try on what you've just taught. And because we haven't concluded our mini lesson, and if you physically position your students in a mini lesson model where they are closer to you than they might be typically in your room, so for example, you might bring them up to a carpeted area. I know here where I am teaching in the Northeast, what we call the tri-state area, I know there's tri-states all over the country, but New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, we've been able to go back to clustering students closer together. Many students have brought back their carpets. When I teach at the secondary level, they don't necessarily have carpets, but they actually have students bring up their chairs and come closer together. So that here, we are not leaving the mini lesson. We know we're still in the mini lesson because our proximity has not changed, but we do a guided practice. And the way I begin the guided practice, always for me, the language is, now it's your turn. And we need this to be quick. Notice it says 2 or 3 minutes. It's not the application. It's not the independent practice. It's a quick guided practice. It's a quick try. And it enables us to really do 2 things: allow learners to try on the teaching point and to allow us to just kind of listen in and see what level of understanding our students are. It's a great moment to check for understanding. So we chunk out that part. Our students are chewing on the concept, trying it out, trying it, thinking about it, talking about it, sketching it. There's a lot of ways that the try can go, but that it is their opportunity to kind of chew and our opportunity to check for understanding. And then of course, we want to end a lesson always with clarity. So I like to call that the clarifying link. It's like a bookend to the connection. They're very similar in tone and time. So again, about 1 to 2 minutes. And what's super important here is that you do restate your teaching point. not in a redundant, not in a, like in my early teaching career, I used to think if I just said, the 11th time versus the 10th, or gave the 47th example versus the 46th, they're going to get it. I don't mean in that way, but once again, we're going back to consistent language. So today we learned that writers balance action and description with dialogue. Okay, so you restate with clarity and the same consistent language in 1 to 2 sentences what you've just taught and what they have just learned, and then you connect it to their ongoing work. And so today, when you were going off to work on your draft, one option you have for your time is to, and for me, I want for students to make a plan during that clarifying link. They can talk their plan, they can sketch their plan, they can jot their plan, they can put their plan on I don't know if you've ever heard of the teaching technique called a status of the class chart. It is a technique that I learned from Nancy Atwell, who is one of the, a real mentor, someone who was early on in the workshop teaching, brilliant woman. It can go on a status of the class chart where there are options of what students are doing and they self-assign. It actually doesn't matter. It's just that you clarify what's been taught and you link this learning to what they're about to do. So friends, that's our architecture. That's the architecture of the mini lesson. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a moment to think. Okay. Anyone have any quick questions about the architecture? Again, I know we come from different experiences, so you might be coming to this webinar extremely well-versed in the architecture. You might be coming to this webinar, maybe having heard it, but not being well-versed. So I just want to give you a moment to be thinking about this architecture. And I'm just going to pause and say, yes, Robert, that's a great connection. It's like I do, we do, you do. I do is here in the teaching. We do is the active engagement. And the you do is planned here in the link and then continues for the remainder of the period until you wrap the workshop up. So it absolutely, the architecture of a mini lesson is grounded in 2 theories. I won't talk theory to you today, but I'm just going to name them in case you want to investigate this further. One, of course, is the gradual release of responsibility, which Robert just pointed out. Thank you. The other is a theory that I think is a little less known, but to me is actually even more illustrative of this kind of teaching. It's called cognitive apprenticeship. Cognitive meaning of the mind, apprenticeship, what you envision and know apprenticeship to mean. So there is an expert in the room. And you are, one could say that you are, yes, you're the teacher, but you are the, expert writer in the room, and that your students are apprenticing under your tutelage. A really inclusive and engaging classroom, of course, begins to share the roles a little bit and invites students to also be apprenticing each other. But yes, so those are the 2 theories, and it does begin with cognitive apprenticeship. Yeah, Nancy, I love that comment that you're putting here in the Q&A about how the consistent language is so important, especially for newcomers. I am going to be talking a lot. I'm going to be doing shout outs for newcomers throughout our time together today. Yes, so Robert, I love that connection you're making to writing is thinking. I do a lot of work with my secondary teams in writing across the curriculum. I do think that that is, the new standards, but many of us thought this before any new standards came out, that there is a belief that we all are teachers of English language arts. And of course, as someone who has specialized in English language learning and reading and literacy, one could say I'm biased or partial, I will admit to that, but I do really believe that we're all teachers of literacy, and a lot of my work is in thinking with teachers of secondary disciplines, science, social studies, foreign language, math, how writing is used across the curriculum, and how the architecture of a mini lesson is relevant to all. So let's now digest all of that and take our thinking today about the architecture of a mini lesson, and let's now bring it into some specific ideas with regard to L's. So first of all, I do want to point out some research on the right, which is from a wonderful, wonderful mentor, Eric Jensen, who is, oops, sorry, friends. I tend to do that when I'm trying to move things around my screen. Eric Jensen has written quite a collection of texts that I think are so relevant to all of us. Teaching with the Brain in Mind, the culturally responsive teaching book that he has. He really does try to bring to light information and brain research and how that can impact us as educators sort of on the ground. So he does have a metric that he uses of the appropriate amount of direct instruction based on students' age, stamina, and brain development, if you will. Okay, so take a look here at the chart and just be thinking about the age or the ages of the students that you teach. And so that's really what we're trying to go for here, is that we want to imagine that lesson length matters. And it's going to matter for all students. This is brain research that's not necessarily just particular to ELs, it's particular to humans. So that length does matter. And of course, it's going to matter even more for multilingual learners in order to have that comprehensible input. As I said earlier, this 4-part architecture allows chunk and chew. Connection is a chunk. Teaching is a chunk. Active engagement is a chew. Clarifying link is a chunk and chew, because students are participatory there and they make a plan. And as we talked about, the guided practice is one way to ensure student understanding. And really, the reason we want to be mini is not just this brain research, which of course is important. It's also because when we teach short, our students can practice long. That if we spend all our time doing, there's a great professional book with this title, but there's also a belief that whoever is doing the work is doing the learning. So we want to make sure that students have plenty of time for independent and collaborative practice. We have to teach short so they can do that practice. So to kind of bring together all of these thoughts and then get into some specific examples, brevity and consistent language are essential for multilingual learners. The predictable structure means everyone in that room knows how learning is going to go and can follow the mini lesson. Even if there is language and words and conversation that they don't fully understand, the architecture will bring understanding because it's consistent and predictable. And that we know that as we pace this architecture, it allows for that chunk and chew to really happen in powerful ways. So let's now dig in to these specific parts of the mini lesson and talk about some examples. Yeah, Nancy, definitely look into cognitive apprenticeship. You'll be happy you did, honestly. And yes, the passive piece of it is something, yeah, absolutely, Emily. Always a shout out to newcomers and a shout out to you as well. That passive learning is something I am always trying to avoid, 1000%. And so, what tends to happen in group dynamics, and once again, this is not about teaching, it's not about classrooms, it's not about multilingual learners, but group dynamics is such that roles are developed even very quickly. People who just meet each other, they quickly settle into roles. And there's a dynamic that happens in groups, and it often happens in classrooms, where you can be teaching and there are the same 3 students participating. This architecture and these techniques that I'm going to talk about completely push back against that. I do not want the same 3 students participating. I want active engagement and participation. When I say active engagement and participation, I am working really hard on never being ableist or one-minded or one-sided or singularly minded in that way. Active participation has to do with verbal communication, nonverbal communication, affect, understanding. So I really want to push back against that passive learning, same 3 kids get it and everybody else, you're just kind of hoping, bowling, shoving it down the middle. We're avoiding that here. So in my connection, I really want to connect to students. And I've actually spent a very long time working on my connections. One of my favorites is to tell a story. Now, early on in my teaching career, that same literacy coach gave me feedback once where she said to me, Patty, you're a really good storyteller. And I said, yes, I'm 7, seventh of 9 children in a large Italian, family. Father was an immigrant. And one of the things we did a lot was to sort of hold on to our culture and our beliefs and our family life was to tell stories. After dinner, we told stories and stories and stories. It's just, it's kind of a joke. My husband, who did not grow up in the same culture, is always like, I can see when the storytelling starts, he's just like maybe going off to do the dishes or something, So I love telling stories. But she said, Patty, your stories are too long. And I was like, okay, well, I'll stop doing that. And she's like, no, I don't want you to stop doing it. I just want you to do it in a way that'll be accessible to all your students. Like, they actually love your stories. And so maybe you want to bring that structure into perhaps like a weekly meeting or something, but it's supposed to be the anticipatory set, right? Friends, we remember that term. It's supposed to be the hook into your lesson. So you've got to be concise and it's got to be clear why you're telling that story. Okay. Another strategy, which is honestly, if you are new to mini lessons, if you feel like you are teaching students for whom their stamina in mini lessons and their engagement in mini lessons is maybe not perhaps at the place you want it to be or to get to, and or if you are teaching newcomers where their language is very emergent and they're still developing, the quickest connection is just to review what you've learned. Writers, we have learned that writers think, draw, and then write every time they are working in writing workshop. Well, guess what? Writers do something else in addition to that. They also go back and revise. So today, I am going to teach you how to add more to your stories in your pictures, in your words, and I'm pointing to the chart here, so that you can be a writer who doesn't just write and draw, but a writer who revises. Okay, so see, I just quickly reviewed that. That would take me about 30 seconds to do. And because I am reviewing what we've learned, I'm also activating the schema. I am working with concepts that have solely been taught in this room with these people, with their experiences. I've got an anchor chart, I've got visuals, and I've got language that I've used before. So it is incredibly newcomer friendly. I will also say, though, that another strategy that I love to use, and I'm going to show you a quick video clip of this in a minute, is to use a simple, familiar metaphor. Now, you might be saying, okay, Patty, what do you mean metaphor is newcomer friendly? Like, do we have the same definition of metaphor? And what do you mean? When you take a concept that lives in the world that is highly familiar to students, it's pop culture, it's culturally relevant to them. It's culturally relevant to, your particular culture where they're living right now in the United States of America, and they are experiencing that, whatever it might be, but it's not writing. When you teach in that metaphor type way, it actually helps them to connect really quickly. And it's an incredibly engaging thing to do. Okay, so there is no right or wrong. It isn't like, oh, okay, I really think that I have to, only review because I have a lot of newcomers, or I want to try telling a story. I like that. You really can use any of these at any time. Just be thoughtful and say what's going to be the best for these students for this unit and this particular mini lesson. So let me show you a quick example of what I mean. Let me set the stage. So as I was saying to you, part of the book and the Classroom Essential series is to create videos. There are many videos in the book that were made during the pandemic, which means that I was in a studio at the publisher's office and I was creating videos because that was all we had access to because we were living through a global pandemic. But as the world began to open up, I realized that I could go into classrooms and actually film clips live. And so that's what you're about to see. And so I am in one of my client schools. I'll give a quick shout out. This is a classroom in Emerson, New Jersey. They are an amazing school district and they are amazing colleagues for many, many years. They have an English language learner population like really every, all of our schools do. And there are teachers in that building where there's this really interesting thing in the state of New Jersey. I won't digress too much, but instead of being observed by your administrator or principal or whomever, you can actually do an action research project instead. And that's your evaluation for the year. And so many teachers in this district really partake in that. There's such a learning community. And so some of the teachers took on mini lessons. And so we've really been steeped in mini lessons and how to do it and how to differentiate them and how to do them differently with different grade levels and with different teaching moves and with L's and all of that good stuff. So what you're going to see here is a clip of a connection. And what I'm doing here is actually making a metaphor for students. And the metaphor is making lemonade and how it is a metaphor for what fantasy writers do. And if you're confused, don't worry, the kids were too at first, not confused, but curious and wondering. And again, what I want you to know going in is that the teachers and I specifically plan to use this metaphor. And there were a couple of things that we did to lead up to it. I'm sure many of you do a lot of pre-teaching vocabulary as one of your English language learner techniques. We all do that, which is great. But I had the absolute pleasure of being a guest host, thanks to Emily, for the state of North Carolina and their Department of Education. And they've got a great consortium and a Twitter handle and a hashtag Together for L's. And we were speaking and learning and talking a few weeks ago using a great book called Success with Multilingual Newcomers and English Learners by Margarita Caldron. And what I really loved about that book is it took something I've been doing for decades, pre-teaching vocabulary, and I have such a firm belief in pre-teaching for so many students and for various reasons, but it took my pre-teaching of vocabulary, I felt, and really elevated it because she has this really amazing, simple, quick 7-step process for bringing vocabulary to students in a way that allows you to really maximize time and bring a lot of vocabulary quickly. So prior to this mini lesson, we decided that there was particular language and vocabulary that was essential to learning, not just for writing, but for other disciplines that we wanted to pre-teach to the English language learners. And, the teacher can do this at another time of the day if you're a classroom teacher, or if you are an L teacher and you have either push out or push in or pull out time, you can make this part of your routine. It was done differently across the grades, but we wanted to bring, first of all, the word element to students, because when you are studying writing, every genre has elements. And what's interesting about the word element is it's a multiple meaning word. And so element was also a word from science, right? So it's like one of those tier 2, tier 3 kind of words that multiple meanings can be very discipline specific. So we pre-taught elements, and we also taught the term balance. Once again, we are going with the concept of balance here, but also balance has a lot to do with math and science. So we pre-taught those things. And then, of course, we made sure, you can see me holding up my just very quickly drawn visual of lemonade. We made sure that every student knew what lemonade was. We had them taste lemonade and just, talk about most of the students in the class had actually had lemonade, and many of those students had even made lemonade. So it was relevant, but we didn't want to assume. Never assume of what their experience is going to be. So that is what kind of went into this lesson. Okay, so now we're going to watch the clip, and what we're going to do is take a look at this connection and what we think it does for our English language learners, in particular, our newcomers. Okay, so let me I have to reshare my screen now. Liz, if for any reason the sound isn't working, jump in there right away, but it should, because we've practiced it. Okay.
I will let you know.
Perfect.
All right, it's coming up. We see it.
Great.
All right.
Taking a look at your writing
Sounds good.
drafts. Okay. Good afternoon, my 5th grade writing friends. Good afternoon. So I have a quick question for you. Have any of you ever made lemonade? Thumb up if you have. Okay. And if you're making lemonade, you know that you take some water, you put it in a pitcher or a glass, and you add lemon juice. Whether it's fresh squeezed lemon juice or lemon juice in a jar, or sometimes it even comes in a powder, right? And what you have to do then is take all of those elements and mix them together. And have you ever been making lemonade where you actually tasted it and thought, way too tart? let me add a little bit of sweetener. So you might add like honey or sugar or agave. Ever have that happen? Or sometimes you make it, you're like, oh, this is really weak. It kind of just tastes like water. So you figured, oh, I need to add some more lemon. Well, when we're making lemonade, we are thinking about taking all of the different elements that go into making a glass of lemonade, and we think about how to put those elements together so our lemonade tastes delicious. So this weekend, when I was taking a look at your writing drafts, I was making this glass of lemonade. And what I actually realized is fantasy writing is a little bit like lemonade. Let me explain to you what I mean. When you are making lemonade, you want to take all of the elements that go into making a lemonade and make it nice and balanced. Not too sweet, not too tart, not too watery. And fantasy writers do that same exact thing. They want to make sure that their writing is balanced. Now, fantasy writers don't balance their writing with lemons or water, right? They balance their writing with elements that make up fantasy texts. And so, two things that fantasy writers use to make their writing balanced would be dialogue and action or description. So today, I am going to teach you how to make your fantasy text really balanced, just like that glass of lemonade, by adding just the right amount of action and description or dialogue. Can I show you what I mean?
That was great. We could see it and hear it. It looked really good.
Excellent, perfect. Thank you, thank you. So friends, as I transition back now to the presentation, what I want you to do is just take a moment to think about what you learned. Take a moment to think about what we had said with regard to what a mini lesson does and what that connection piece does. And I want you to jot any thoughts, questions, noticings into the chat box. I'll give you a moment to just kind of digest and take your thoughts and put any thoughts, questions, noticings, and put them into the chat box. Okay, so for me and for the teachers with whom I was planning and working together, we wanted to start this mini lesson in a way that really helped show the students or bring them the concept of how writers balance elements in writing. Okay, yeah, Dolores, food, drink connections always work. Okay, yeah, chunking with metaphors and lemonade to really build that skill development. Absolutely, Robert. So what we were looking to really do is to think about how we can utilize and really capitalize on things that they knew, but also bring the learning to them in a way that will conceptually show them what I mean. Because every student in that room had experienced lemonade that was too tart, too sweet, too weak. And so we wanted them to understand that writing is just like that, that an engaging text, what a writer does is they give you just the right amount of characterization and description and action and dialogue. Okay. And we were really maximizing language here because, again, not lemonade, that was sort of a universal kind of connection, but balance and element. Okay. So notice I didn't say lemonade had ingredients. That is true. Lemonade has ingredients, a perfectly good word, but we wanted to stick with the word elements. And we didn't want to use them interchangeably. Could we have? I suppose we could have, but why not? Here's why. One thing that's really important to understand about language and consistent language is every time you add in a synonym, the learner has to reprocess. Now, let's say you're having a conversation with a multilingual learner and they don't understand, and you realize you have a better word to use. And when I say better, the way I'm qualifying it is it will make more sense to the learner. Maybe it's a cognate. Maybe it's a word that you've used before with them and you know they know it. Those things are perfectly fine to do. But when you just try to sort of fish for synonyms, what ends up happening is whether this student has language processing challenges or is a multilingual learner, is they have to then process this other word. And it's like the processing starts again. Okay, so we don't want to be throwing in superfluous language. We went with element. It has context. It was pre-taught. It's being utilized across the disciplines, and it is showing them conceptually and literally and figuratively and with language what it is that we are teaching them. And specifically, we are using familiar context and background knowledge. Lemonade, they all experienced it. They all knew it. Visuals really matter. Now, everyone knew the term lemonade, and everyone knew what lemonade was because we ensured that. But I still made that really quick sketch of lemonade because I don't want to do too much talking without a visual. I know that for a lot of students that can cause like a cognitive overload. Okay, I considered maybe using Relia, but I was afraid that with all that I was trying to manage in this taping, I'm sure my age, but in creating this video, that I was like going to spill it or I wasn't going to have a place to put it. So I went with the drawn image versus the Relia, but I'm sure the Relia would work. And this whole idea of pre-teach, it is such a strategy that I just really, really value. Okay, so what I want to have you do then is just think about the steps and all the moves and all the thinking that went into it. We wanted a connection. We wanted it to really draw students in. We wanted it to build conceptually an understanding of what it is that writers do that can be taken across disciplines. That was the connection. As far as then moving into the next stage of the mini lesson is the teaching. That 5 to 7 minute period of time where you're going to teach. I believe that in writing mini lessons, you have 4 options. There could be a teacher model. I could actually model for students how to add dialogue or how to balance description and dialogue in my fantasy piece. It's great. It's very newcomer friendly. The way to make it especially newcomer friendly is to make sure that what you're writing about is something that they can understand. They've either experienced it, it's a shared experience with the class, it's something, universal that you've talked about, that that they know. You want to make the topic that you model with really relevant to students. So it becomes very newcomer friendly. Another way to model that is also very newcomer friendly is to use a text to model. Now, it could be a piece of literature like we see here in the Land of Words, right? Or if you're teaching older students, House on Mango Street, right? Like we can use a text, but I want you to understand that text is, it's defined in multiple ways in writing. If you've previously written a piece and you want to show students, that's a text model because you're not writing it in front of them. If you want to bring a piece of children or young adult or adolescent literature, that's a text model. Behind me is a text model written by Joshua, a multilingual learner from that classroom. So I chose in my teaching for this particular lesson to utilize the text model because I feel that it is especially relevant for students of all ages. We chose an incredible piece of writing of a multilingual learner, very specifically, although we had so many great options. And we let the text do the talking, if you will, and do the teaching. What's the shared writing model? Well, shared writing is a technique where teacher and students co-compose. So I could have said, so friends, can I show you what I mean? Let's take our fantasy idea that we brainstormed the other day, and let's write the lead of that story. And so how do you think we should start? Do you think that we should start with the setting, really describing the place, and maybe a fantastical element about that place? Or do you want to start with the character, with really the characterization? Okay, turn and talk. And you basically engage students in conversation. When I do the shared writing model, I use a lot of translanguaging. I was just and students know that about me. I was just in a classroom yesterday. I wasn't teaching writing. I was teaching another element of literacy. And one of the students came up and he's like, these are newcomers and these are the languages they speak. So can we take a moment and just let them know what's going on? Which I thought was great. It was such an amazing classroom where the multilingual learners are absolutely so valued. Their participation is valued. And so we do a lot of translanguaging there, perhaps sharing in their native language. And then the person who shares out, the partner, the writer who shares out, does share out in English. So it's very newcomer friendly. And then, of course, there's a teaching technique called shared inquiry. That is probably the highest level of teaching. And I don't necessarily mean from language acquisition. I just mean from a cognitive perspective. That in shared inquiry, together with your students, you analyze a piece of writing where you don't say, look at how Joshua did this. And you teach and name and show what Joshua did. You analyze with students. Yes, multilingual learners are absolutely capable of doing that, as all students are, but it does require a lot of pre-teaching of language and just experience in what the inquiry model is. So if you're thinking newcomers, the other three are more immediately newcomer friendly. Let me show you another example of this. Here's an example using the amazing text Jabari Jumps by Gaia Cornwall. I don't know if you know it. Really cute story of a young student, a young child, Jabari, and he's too afraid to jump off the diving board. So there are two really important things to remember when you are using a text model. First, notice on the left that this text is annotated. Okay, now, could we add some visuals here for precise action as well as talking? We can, we absolutely can. But once students know that language, we can have the language, we could have the visual, we could have both. Either way, it is annotated. Okay, you see that also in, let me just go back. Oh, you don't see it yet. You'll see in the upcoming slide. You also want to potentially provide an opportunity for the student to experience a text in their native language. That's not always available to us. So for example, Jabari Jumps is not available in Spanish or any other language. However, on 13.org, that .org site that brings to us so many educational resources, they actually have a teacher reading with her daughter, and there are Spanish captions. Okay, so one way to really bring this text model to students in a very inclusive way is to annotate the text visually really well and clearly, and to perhaps think about providing the text in the student's native language, if that is available to you. Okay, so in the teaching, first of all, choose the teaching method with your newcomers and multilingual learners in mind. Again, it's not a right or wrong, it's what's going to best work. Keep your demonstrations brief. Use consistent, concise language and visuals, and perhaps even dramatize. What's so funny is one of the critiques I gave myself after I made that video was, I really do believe in gestures. I really do believe in nonverbal signals. So you saw that there was a visual image of balance that all teachers had, but there was also my gesture of balance. The only problem with it is, as I've said before, I am Italian. I talk with my hands. So I feel like I've got to minimize that a little bit so students don't think I'm demonstrating some type of gesture when I'm actually just talking. So that would probably go a little bit better if you minimize that part of it a little bit. But those gestures really do work, action, just showing these elements, not equivalent. This was a gesture from math. It is not equivalent balance. Okay, so I do think that all of those techniques help to build comprehensible input. Let me just stop, check in quickly with our, with our chat box here. Critical, analytical, and creative reading and writing skills with a mentor text. That's exactly what it is. And if you really do want to get to a place where you are doing that inquiry model, where it's really critical, analytical reading and writing, if you start with a student model text in particular, you can really continue to build upon that. So I love that comment there. Robert, thank you for sharing that. So we've chunked, now our students need to chew. Students now need to try it. They can try it in the text you just showed them, and they can try it in their own writing. Once again, not a right or wrong. What do I mean, try it in the text? Well, let's say I taught them about how to include precise actions using Jabari jumps. I could turn to another page of Jabari jumps and say, let's take a look at another page from Gaia Cornwall's book. What does she do here? And they're actively engaged looking for examples of precise action and or dialogue. I can use the text I just taught in. That's very newcomer friendly because you are still helping students to manage the guided practice. And quite frankly, you know that they can do this practice because you turn to a page in your teaching text that has these techniques that you're teaching. So it's kind of like a lot of teachers feel like it makes me less nervous. I know they can try it. I know it's on the page. I want to go for that. That works. Other times, though, you want students to try this in their own writing. I like both. I feel like that potentially could be a harder thing to do, but I actually think it's better for students. Why? The guided practice is in the place where they actually have to do the independent practice. So there's a quickly transfer there. 2 quick questions I want to address. 13.org. What I did actually, great question, Elda, was I searched for Jabari jumps in different languages. I was like, actually, have they published this in another language? I looked for that. And what came up in the Google search was the fact that on 13.org, they made a video where they put the captions in. So that's how I was able to find it. I don't know if they have captions in Spanish or other languages in all of their videos, but as I was searching for something, it was created that way. Robert, I define an anchor text as the text that anchors the teaching, as a text that models what it is we want to do and be and produce as writers, and we can study it and learn from it and elevate our own writing. So in this lesson, what I did was an active engagement in students' own writing. The first thing that I did is I asked them to turn and talk, and you can see I'm listening in. As I was directing them to turn and talk, I did give them 2 sentence stems or frames that they could be using. You can either say, I am going to add, or my character will say. So we gave them those 2 sentence frames. They're common, they're pretty familiar to the group. And so we gave those as options. You can see me saying them out there. That is not just Italian talk, that actually is a gesture that we use, a technique that we use for this active engagement. Could I ask students to quickly try to jot something? I could. And I do that sometimes, but it requires very experienced writers who can jot quickly. It is just as effective to ask them to write in the air, which is just writing terminology for, say it out loud, don't write it down. Okay, so write in the air, again, that's a gesture. Sentence frames, they did a turn and talk. And you can see that I'm coaching and supporting. I am saying back to students. I am honoring and acknowledging. I am seeing who's really getting it. I'm really coaching into that. Because in the active engagement, we want to make this as multisensory, as engaging and active as possible. So as I said earlier, students can jot, they can draw, they can talk, they can act it out. You can see here again that I am coaching throughout. Yes, you start by considering the part you want to stretch. Jaleesa, who is one of the students in the class, started with the character's name. You start with the character's name, okay? Or as you're brainstorming the actions you're adding, show your partner the actions, okay? So there are many techniques that we can use to make active engagement truly active, engaging for maximum comprehensible input. And then, of course, there's the clarify and link. So one of the things that you can see in the background is what I started to do with that anchor chart, the anchor text, is I also color-coded it. And that's another way to bring comprehensible input. That action and description was pink, and dialogue was that sort of, I don't know, greenish, yellowish color. And that I put it on our balance scale. And that in the clarify and link, I did actually ask them to jot their plan. we've taught these students that jot is defined as you can write a sentence, you can write some words, you can actually draw or sketch. We have a universal definition of jot, because then I know that you know what you are doing. And I know that if you need some further support, that I can provide it for you, because I know what you're doing and what you're taking out of this mini lesson. Because we want to restate same exact language, same exact gestures, same exact visuals, sentence stems or frames as applicable. So friends, I don't know about you, but I feel like that hour just flew by. And so in the last couple of minutes here, what I want to do is give you an opportunity to, in the chat box, share a takeaway or ask a question. As Liz said earlier, there will be a winner. My publisher is going to send a copy of the Classroom Teacher's Guide to Writing Workshop Mini Lessons to a winner. And the winner will be based on either your participation in the chat, or if you want to email a takeaway, you can do that as well. So why don't you do that? I'm going to stop sharing, Liz, so you can kind of take over for final words. But those of you who want to put your chat in the chat box, you are still welcome to do that now.
All right. So now is about the time where, as people are gathering their thoughts and their takeaways, we let everybody know who's coming up next week, and then we'll circle back and revisit if there are any lingering questions. So for next week's webinar, we'll return on our normal Thursday, and we have a session. This is a reoccurring session on our webinar series. This is Coffee with Katie and Richard, and they're going to discuss making grade level text accessible. Now, this one is specific to grades 4 through 12. And you know, Katie and Richard, they've been on with us several times. They're a lot of fun, very knowledgeable. So we would love it if you joined us for this webinar. So this is next week, 3 o'clock Eastern time. You can register on our website or just click on the registration when you get that email, because you know, we always like to email you and remind you about these webinars. All right. And then do not forget our new Decodable text for tweens is now available. It's called Go Decode. Just did a webinar on this a couple of weeks ago, sort of giving you all the details. But if you need more information or like some samples, just go ahead and contact me. I'm happy to give you any more information on that. All right, so let's go back to the chat and the Q&A. I left this, it wasn't really a question, but it was a comment. Nancy said, thank you so much for reinforcing the consistent language that the teacher uses daily. So important for our English learners. So I just wanted to mention that. Oh my gosh.
A quick question, Liz, if you don't mind me jumping in. Anna Maria asked, and it's a great question. Can mini lessons be used in small time classes? 1000%. I do mini lessons when I'm teaching, support classes where there's 6 kids in the class. And I do mini lessons when I'm teaching, in college or high school or elementary school where there's 20 to 30 students in a class. So absolutely great question.
I love that. That is a great question. You're way ahead of me. I'm looking in the chat here. A lot of love around the architecture of the mini lesson slide. People really, really like that. It's so nice to see it kind of spelled out right there very clearly. So I know I appreciate that, and I think everybody else does too. And then Robert says these methods are great for community college English learner settings too. So love that. And then the connection part of the mini lesson, because it provides a foundation for the rest of the lesson. Very important to get started off on the right foot. And I also noticed too, in your explanation, you were talking a lot about setting context and things that you did in the lead up to the connection, for example, making sure everybody has a clear understanding of what jot means, or making sure everybody understands what you mean when you say write it in the air, and all of those things. So it's very intentional, very deliberate, and it all plays a role. So yeah, they love your slides. And it seems like if it was a contest, the biggest takeaway would be the architecture of the mini lesson. Yeah. So I want you all to keep these takeaways in your brain and tweet them. I put this slide at the end of our webinar today too, because we're doing that book giveaway. Remember, the book is called Teacher's Guide to Writing Workshop Mini Lessons. It's coming out next week officially, but we want to get you your copy. So get your takeaway, go ahead and tweet it, or you can email it to Patty, and then she will pick a winner and we will get that book sent out to you. We want to give people who are catching this on the recording a chance to submit their takeaway too. So Patty, when do you think you're going to pick a winner? Sometime next week?
Yes, let's do early next week. This way, those of you who are here and want to digest, you can certainly, chat now, but you could also email. And those who are catching it on recording, you also have a couple of days to do that recording. So let's say by next Tuesday. Does that sound good?
Next Tuesday. That sounds good. We'll pick a winner next Tuesday. And I'm in the chat going to put Patty's email address again for those of you who aren't fans of Twitter and don't like to tweet. We don't want to leave you out. So let me copy that. There we go. So you can email the takeaway there. All right. Well, we need to wrap it up. That was a great session. Thank you so much, Patty. We'd love to have you back.
Your activity in the chat and the Q&A, it always makes it so much fun. So my pleasure. And thank you all so much.
All right. This is where you can find Saddleback on social media. Please don't forget to tweet for your chance to win, or email for your chance to win the book. And thank you so very much. And we'll see everybody for next week's session. Take care. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, friends. Enjoy your evening.
Bye.